Hello, my name is Vicky, and this week we're going to be talking about ecotourism in modified spaces. So just to review the definition of ecotourism before we really get into the presentation, ecotourism is a form of tourism that fosters learning experiences and appreciation of the natural environment, or some component thereof within an associated cultural context. So as humans, we thrive on roughly 17% of the Earth's land surface, and we're running out of space. In 2050, our population is supposed to rise to 9.8 billion, and that's set to rise again in 2100 to 11.2 billion. So the reason we really need these modified spaces is because we don't have much room for those natural environments. So if we go back to our definition, that some element thereof is really important within modified spaces, because modified spaces are a kind of a mishmash of different areas. And so throughout this next part of the presentation, we're going to go through each one separately and try and give you an overall idea of how different modified spaces exist. So urban spaces are really common. Most of our population live within urban spaces, and so it's really important that we have modified spaces there because they're easy to access. And these areas will encourage the presence of wildlife, flora and fauna, and they also come in a variety of forms. So you can think about municipal parks, even cemeteries, golf courses, and sort of remaining natural spaces. And they become an oasis for wildlife. And here you can see some of the pictures from London. Okay, so within our different types of modified spaces, artificial reefs are another kind. And these can either be intentional artificial reefs or unintentional. So some unintentionals will include things like shipwrecks and discarded solid materials, things from like natural disasters or dumping. So the intentional ones can be things like planning a reef. So we have examples of New York subway cars being used to create artificial reefs, and also concrete sort of balls being put into the ocean, again, to create a different kind of reef. So another of our components of modified spaces are degraded or devastated spaces. Now these can be the outcomes from war, mining, deforestation, contaminated areas, overgrazing, also other human factors, and that can be really sad, but we can have positives from these. So for instance, there are abandoned quarries and mining being made into mountain biking, and so there are other purposes for these spaces. So of course we also have negatives, so we can split them into environmental, social, cultural and economic as well. So within environmental, we actually don't know the carrying capacity and life cycle of these modified spaces we're creating, so that can be a problem. And also the amount of building resources and infrastructure we need for these new areas can be degrading for the environment. Also, there are unintended consequences, however best we plan. Within social, we have diverted seasonal employment, and so this can be the same as for normal tourism. Also, the preservation and authenticity or the reinforcement of stereotypes. So again, this is a problem we see within tourism. It can also happen within modified spaces. And also, culture is still vulnerable to Western ways as more tourists come into an area. And finally, economic. So large investments needed to create these modified spaces. And this is difficult for developing economies, and also it can be difficult to incorporate sustainable practices into them. There's competition with other industries, and also the governance and political issues can be a problem too. So a different and kind of up-and-coming area of modified spaces is virtual reality or augmented reality. And this may seem extreme, but tourism companies are using augmented and virtual reality to create new sort of experiences for tourists. And so you can see some of the examples over here. Okay, so we've come to the end of the lecture. So some final thoughts are to try and think about the modified spaces that you've been to and think about how they were positive or negative and also fit within the components of ecotourism. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. And also have a think about how technology is going to adapt and change ecotourism in the future. Thanks for listening.